I'm taking on the challenge of combining two characters from two very different properties and seeing if I can mash them together in order to create a unique spin on a classic character. So last year I did a Samus and Sailor Moon mashup. Samus, she's blonde with tied up hair. Sailor Moon is blonde with tied up hair. I was like, oh, that's kind of like a somewhat of a crossover, finding two different characters from two different series and putting them together. For me, I'm going to be using Zelda and Miss Chalice from Cuphead, and I'm going to combine those two because they have like similar color palettes. Her proportions are pretty normal or pretty average in terms of like human body proportions, but you can still think of shape language through things like how her head is kind of a pretty round shape, and then the rest of her body, because she's wearing this cape, it almost has a bit of a triangular or trapezoid type approach to it. And then afterwards it thins out at the legs. And this is a good way to start if you're figuring out your character and you're not quite sure how to approach it. Figure out the basic shapes for it. So right now I'm just figuring out roughly the pose, because typically the stuff from Cuphead's very cartoony, it's very loose, and all the characters are very expressive in their pose, so I want to try to get that as well. I feel like the pose with Zelda with the torch is very adventurous. I'll give her the Miss Chalice's skirt, but I'll change it up a little bit. Make it a little bit more regal looking to match the Zelda aspect. I think there's like an eye shape thing. I feel like if you're ever stuck figuring out an item, you can always just rely on good old eyeball. And I feel like there's a bunch of eyeballs in Zelda as well, so makes sense. I worry about the straw after I'm done everything else. Don't worry, we will figure it out. Yeah, I've done the rough line work, and I can start finalizing it. Wow, look at that. Look at that difference. It's kind of neat. So I don't know how everybody likes approaching it, but usually for me, I like to do a rough line work. So for me, I consider this my rough line work, and then I like to go in afterwards and then just clean up the lines, make sure it's like really clean and smooth, but I'll do it on like another layer. So that's how I approach it, especially I think if it comes to line work and having really clean line work, I think this is probably one of the better ways to do it. Instead of a hair braid, she'll just have a hairband, and that's can be the straw. Now that we're done finishing the line work, we can now get into coloring. Now, the approach that I'm going to do is going to be a little bit different from Krita. If you're used to how I do the clipping group in Krita, I'm doing the same thing, but this time with Clip Studio. So I'm going to fill out the entire character of Zelda in this blue silhouette, very similar to the. But this time, once I'm done coloring the entire silhouette of Zelda, I'm going to make a new layer above our blue silhouetted layer. And then if you look right below the normal, where it says normal, which is the layer blending mode, and you click that little square and then it has like an outline of a square around it, it parents that new layer, that new blank layer, to our blue silhouetted layer of Zelda. And what that does is that I can basically paint however I want and not have to worry about coloring outside of the blue silhouette. And it makes it easy so I can just worry about the colors and color a little bit more freely and not have to worry about making everything super clean. Now, in terms of the color choice, I'm actually kind of trying to combine both Zelda and color palette that they both have. And lucky for me, both of them have blonde hair and they both have a little bit of that blue, blonde, yellow color scheme going on. So combining the two wasn't actually too hard. But you can see I took a little bit of Miss Chalice's clothing color scheme and applied it to Zelda in the skirt that you'll see. And I think I might have changed Zelda's like shirt, where you can see in Breath of the Wild it's more of like a blue teal color. But I think in this case I made it like a black or a dark navy color to match Miss Chalice's 1940s kind of black body color scheme for a lot of cartoon characters. So yeah, it was kind of like staying with those color schemes of yellow, ochre, cream color, dark navy, and brown to have that nice little balance between the two styles so that it matches.
Videos like these wouldn't be possible without our awesome patrons and YouTube members. Become a member today and unlock cool perks like exclusive chats with our creators, access to class recordings, and critique from instructors.
And it's pretty straightforward. All I'm doing is just following the lighting that I'm picking out. So I'm like, yeah, the lighting is coming from the right hand side. So I'm gonna basically make sure all the shadows are in that direction, keeping it very straightforward and simple. So there's never anything overly complicated when doing it in this style. It's just more of like having consistency with the forms. Pretty much just being like, okay, sunlight's coming from one direction, and then just sticking to it. This type of style is very clean and simple. I'm not gonna try to worry about gradations or kind of overly complex shadow shapes and forms. And I'm following the curvature and shape of the head itself too. And because I want everything to be a little bit more vibrant, I'm gonna make sure everything is leaning in a more saturated direction. I'm trying to think of it as the basic shape, so I'm just focusing less on realistic lighting and more on just what can I do to accentuate kind of like the forms and shape of my drawing. So the nose might be a little bit of shadow, and maybe like right where the wrinkle is, maybe just like a little bit. Now for the arm, because it's already dark, I'm gonna lean more into it as lighting rather than adding a deeper shadow. I feel like lighting wise it'll be easier and makes a little bit more sense. Regardless, there's not really too much lighting in general anyways in these areas. Just the cape's mostly in shadow. I'm decided to just make the whole thing its darker color. Now the coloring process that I'm using here is something called cell shading. And cell shading is when you use a very limited amount of colors and palettes to create a very striking visual style and aesthetic in your piece. It has that very limited color palette, so you can really tell where the light and shadows is. So how do you make cell shading work? Well, you really just need two things. You need to have a limited color palette, either 2 to 3 colors. And so as you can see, my Zelda here, she really just has light on the right side and then shadows on the left side. And then the second thing that you need for cell shading is usually an outline. Now the outline is kind of up to you on how you want to do it. Sometimes you might see very chunky, thick outlines like in comic books or video games like Borderlands, or it might be just a little bit more uniform and thinner like you would see in an animated TV show. The key to cell shading, or at least for this type of style, there's very minimal amount of blending. I'm not having any gradations. I'm not blending the light with the shadow. All the shadows and all the lighting has a very sharp and clean cut transition from one to the other, and they're all quite graphic and flat in their application, just to keep that more simplistic appeal to it. And I'm also just following a rough three-dimensional feel with the character. I'm not trying to go for a very realistic rendering. It's just enough that it gives a three-dimensional feel to the final rendering of the character. And almost done. I was like, am I doing? Get everything as I go, right? The wood and the fire. Now fire. Some reds. Yeah, we want some reds. Here it is. Here's the Zelda mixed with Miss Chalice kind of edition, done in a cell shaded manner. And the color combinations actually worked out pretty good too. Definitely leaning more into Zelda in terms of the design and shape, but like the art style and some of the colors borrowed from Miss Chalice, like the headband and everything. So yeah, I feel like it turned out pretty good. Pretty happy with it. Join a virtual class in seconds and learn live from professional artists. Enjoy weekly assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork so you can create like a fearless illustrator. If you learned something new, please like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Here's a couple other videos you can check out next.